Shalom everybody, and welcome to our very special occasion, very special lecture of Professor Susan Herbst, President of University of Connecticut. We are also very grateful to all our students, our faculty. We have here faculty from not only from communication, but also from the political science, Department of Political Sciences. And of course, we have the guest from the University of Connecticut. I hope your visit was continued to be very good in terms of relationship between our two institutions. And before I hand over the mic to Eliu Katz to introduce President Herbst, I would like to thank the Truman Institute for hosting us, and to Marcy and our staff that organize a lot of whatever is needed in organizing the and just for the order of things, we'll have Professor Eliu Katz introducing our guest, and after the lecture, we will have hopefully responses from people that find it very relevant. We are all finding it relevant, but we have several researchers whose area is close either to American politics and history, as well as discourse of civility and incivility. So we'll have a lot to talk about. Thank you very much, and Eliu.
Okay. Like all introductions, this is as much about the introducer as about the introducee. So, I made a few notes. Susan was my student for a while, and so it's a great source of pleasure and honor for me to be asked to welcome her to the Hebrew University, even if the occasion virtually requires me to reveal the well-known secret of how academics manage to be in more than one place at the same time, and legally. But with your permission, I'll skip the secret and just announce that Susan was a star graduate student at the Annenberg School at USC, along with Doug Hughes, of course, wherever he's right there, and that all of us, permanent faculty and visitors, were proud of her already then. And now there's even more reason for pride. And Susan reciprocates, always lauding her teachers. As Ruth Katz likes to say, quoting one of her favorite philosophers, Aristotle gave birth to his parents. I think that Jesus is a better example, but we were arguing about that. This is the moment to recall Susan's legendary mentor, here's a surprise, Jim Benninger, who died at such an early age. Jim left an indelible mark on the field of mass communication, shifting attention away from the media as a source of direct effects as to a much more subtle concern with the kinds of cognitive processes that make room for information, for agenda setting, for framing, for third persons, and so on. As researcher and teacher, Susan has carried on in this spirit. She has contributed to clarifying the various concepts of public opinion and to critiquing the individualistic and behavioristic biases of modern polling techniques. She has helped to reinstate the idea of conversation into political communication, beginning with her study of the French salons of the 18th century. She has explored the different sources to which decision makers turn to discover public opinion. In a word, she has contributed to reuniting opinion, communication, and decision-making as part of a unified system all in historical perspective. And lately, she has been considering the rhetoric of political debate and electoral campaigning about which we will be hearing today. That's Herbst, the academic. Herbst, the administrator, is another story that deserves to be told in parallel and to raise the question of how one does these different things at the same time, my theme. After spending more than a decade on the faculty at Northwestern University, Susan began to find interest in the administrative ladder as well, and was enlisted as dean at Temple University, as acting president at SUNY Albany, as head of the university system of the state of Georgia that oversees some 35 universities, and now, quite recently, has been named president of the stately University of Connecticut. It leaves one breathless, but it's true. Just to make sure, I attended the inaugural ceremony. While I'm not empowered to award honorary degrees or to bestow other academic honors, there is one thing I have the power to do, and that is to bestow on Susan the Hebrew University's best joke. This is the joke that is told about the most traveled colleagues of each generation, and it goes like this. 2 planes crashed in mid-air, and Professor Verblovsky or Professor Eisenstadt, or the busiest commuter of each generation, was on both of them. Now, let it be said that 2 planes crashed in midair, and Susan Herbst was on both of them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's my first time in Israel, so this has been a very exciting week for us. We have a whole delegation from the University of Connecticut. I have some of my colleagues here. I have my husband here, Doug Hughes, and the University, Hebrew University, is so welcoming to us. And the president and I signed an MOU this morning. We hope to have some kind of permanent place here and really develop an ongoing relationship. And Hebrew University is a place that I heard about when I was 21 years old, and I met Elihu, and he's my best teacher. And it's unprofessional to cry as a university president, but between Elihu and Jim Benniger, who Elihu spoke beautifully about, it shaped me as a scholar and as an intellectual, and I could not be more grateful to Elihu, to Ruth, such inspirations to us. Elihu thinking all the time. Even you go out to a movie with him, and it has to be a big analysis afterward. And once we went out to a movie with him in Los Angeles when I was at the Annenberg School, and we came home and a message on our machine, our answering machine, with yet another analysis that had struck him on the way home from the theater. But really characterizes life as an intellectual and what I hoped to be when I was in graduate school. So could not be more grateful, and to Jim, who you mentioned. So thanks for inviting me here today. I'm thrilled to give a talk. I'm very provincial. I only study American politics and public opinion, so I need your help to make this comparative. That's one of the things I'm looking forward to learning from you. I know we have a couple of Americanists here who can keep me honest. But this is it's kind of a new project for me to work on civility and incivility. It's related to public opinion, which is my real expertise, but it's something that I've gotten intrigued about. Public opinion is the concept that I guess I've been obsessed with, for my entire scholarly life, and it's mushy, and it's wide open, and there's so many possibilities, and I think civility is in that category as well. Very hard to define. You know it when you see it, but really full of scholarly possibilities. But it's also, like public opinion, central to democratic theory and American democratic practice, but also very, very aggravating and opens up more questions than it answers when you start to study civility. And like public opinion, it doesn't go away. Civility is something, and incivility in the United States, I think, better characterizes our political discourse. it will always have a place in our political lives if we're going to be citizens or participants or leaders. It's something that we have to think about, that we're forced to think about. Beyond democratic theory and political science and practice, another reason that I wrote a book on civility is because of my experience with my students over many years, and particularly my undergraduate students. I had been working with, when I was in Georgia, working with one of our legislators in the state assembly on free speech matters and whether undergraduates really feel as though they can speak freely on a college campus. So he and I saw this differently. So I decided to settle it empirically, and I said we should do a study of all the undergraduates in Georgia across all kinds of different institutions, from very big, prestigious institutions like the University of Georgia and Georgia Tech, all the way to small places and rural areas. And our goal for that political project was to see whether students felt comfortable on campus expressing their opinions, their political opinions. And what we found was pretty surprising to me, at least. The faculty were not an issue. I was relieved to find, as a university administrator, no complaints there beyond the usual stuff about faculty. But many students, across so many different kinds of institutions and ethnic groups and racial groups, expressed a kind of profound discomfort in talking about politics, certainly about religion as the American South, but or important social issues, a discomfort talking to each other. They were worried about getting in a fight with somebody, about being passionate where it wasn't welcome, concerned about saying something offensive, or just getting upset themselves. And undergirding this fear is a fear of social isolation, something that really weighs heavily on you when you are looking to date or find a match. So great discomfort across all kinds of student groups. They don't feel great about political argument, most of all. In fact, they would like to avoid it at any cost because they see it leading to incivility, to disruption with their social network, and to unhappiness. And I found it to be very troubling, and that's how this project started. And I wondered, as a lot of us do, whether I was any good at that when I was in college. Did I really seek out people who were different from me, who didn't agree with me? Did I ever change my mind? I hope so, but who knows? Taking it to a much grander level, to a macro level, I ask, does America know how to argue in a civil, productive fashion? And I think the answer is a resounding no. Hence our current political discourse in the United States, which is mostly, and you've seen it, I'm sure, flip and hysterical, annoying, feels very dangerous increasingly in the United States. And so there's incivility all around us in daily life. And again, I'm talking about the United States, so you're going to have to do translation for me. But in the United States, at least, incivility all around us in daily life, but I'm not interested in, and not talking about today, lack of manners or general social rudeness, like when you were going to go into a parking space and somebody scoots ahead of you, or gives you the finger in traffic. I'm sure you have that here. No fingers, no. Okay, yeah. Although my husband says it's more my driving than any kind of incivility. But these are in the realm of social manners. Social manners, very important, but less interesting to me than political civility and discourse. How we talk, how we tolerate each other's beliefs, and whether it goes anywhere productive with regard to public policy, ultimately, and democratic life in America. So let me talk about three, and I'll keep this talk very general, but happy to get into more theoretical matters as we get into discussion. But three aspects. First, and very briefly, civility in American history. So let's get some context about where we are in the United States right now, and whether we've really hit bottom in 2013. Where have we been as a nation with regard to civility? Second, then I want to talk about the balance between civility and incivility. Maybe some incivility is helpful. Maybe it's a good thing. This is very hard for people to think about, but maybe we just need a tougher skin. And it's not really incivility at all. It's our weakness that bothers us. Last, let me talk a little bit about how we might boost civility, particularly through schools and colleges, places that can still have very powerful effects on shaping us as citizens. As a communication person, as a political scientist, this is like the weakest part of my talk because I'm not so practical. So look forward to ideas you have about that. The last chapter of most books in political science is K to 12 education should do something about this after we diagnose whatever the problem is in American democratic practice. But first, to history, at least in the United States. It looks like there's a lot of incivility in the United States right now, but compared to what? I mean, it's very hard to talk about, if not in either comparative perspective, which I don't do, international perspective, or historical, which in the United States, which I feel more comfortable with. Historians who I talk to and who have written about this try to remind us, without much success, that incivility really has been a constant in American life. We have always, Americans, fought with each other, fought pretty fiercely with each other. In the 18th century, in the days of our founding, incivility was a constant. It was very obvious. It was all around. We glory in a lot of it, like the British Crown and its abuses and how that led to the evolution of a free nation, and the original Tea Party, which was, I think, not a great moment of civility. And then we have our current day Tea Party. Certainly much incivility in the 18th century, part of our founding, a lot of duels, ugly language, mudslinging, usually not directed so much at the crown, at England, but toward each other. I was reading recently about Thomas Jefferson and his battles he had a lot of provincial ministers and politicians that he fought with to build the University of Virginia, which is his great educational legacy. And it was about as nasty as anything you'd see today, how they tried to take each other down and fighting about this institution. Our founding fathers, the United States, not models of civility or dignity in the least. There's a historian, Ron Chernow, has written a lot about different founding fathers very well, said that even George Washington wasn't immune. And Chernow says, quote, "At the start of his presidency, Americans still viewed Washington as sacrosanct and exempt from press criticism. By the end of his first term, he had shed this immunity and reeled from vicious attacks. Opposition journalists didn't simply denigrate Washington's presidential record, but accused him of aping royal ways to prepare for a new monarchy. The most merciless critic was Philip Freneau, editor of the National Gazette. That's the main voice of the Jeffersonians. Even something as innocuous as Washington's birthday celebration, Freneau mocked as a monarchical farce that exhibited every species of royal pomp and parade. And that was, the light stuff. And Washington fought back as well, so it could get very heated. Other journalists dredged up moldy tales of his supposed missteps in the French and Indian War and derided him, Washington, as an inept general during the Revolutionary War. In his later anti-Washington incarnation, Thomas Paine gave the laurels for wartime victory against the British to General Horatio Gates. "You slept away your time in the field till the finances of the country were completely exhausted," Paine taunted Washington, "and you had but little to share in the glory of the event. Had America relied on Washington's cold and unmilitary conduct," Paine insisted, "the commander-in-chief would in all probability have lost America." So it gives you just some sense of how people even talked about a revered figure like George Washington. The 19th century didn't see much improvement, far from it. Americans argued in ways that demeaned themselves and others. Often, as Alexis de Tocqueville, the open-minded visitor from France, noted, we silenced each other through speech and intimidation, hence the beginning of the spiral of silence. He said he fell in love with America in many, many ways in his 19th century travels around the East Coast and the Midwest. But he was very conscious of our flaws, and in particular, the willingness of Americans to crush minority opinion with whatever they had. And it was de Tocqueville in the 1830s who coined the phrase tyranny of the majority. Tocqueville analyzed our inequalities, the tensions over slavery and prejudice in non-slave states, but he could not have quite foreseen the dip in civility of the late 1850s. And that, I think that if I had to pick a rock bottom moment in civility in the United States, it would be the late 1850s, the most uncivil, brutal period in American social, political, intellectual history. We approached a horrendous civil war that would divide the nation, change it forever, and sustained a level of incivility that really makes today's cable news and even the most hateful blogs look like child's play. The most famous image of that era, when it comes to civility and incivility, is one that I grabbed for the cover of my book. It's a beating on the floor of the U.S. Senate. There was a senator from Massachusetts, Senator Sumner, was giving. He was actually sitting at his desk using what they call franking privileges. You could send out free mail back to your district, usually advertising how great you are doing as a senator. So he had given a speech, a very rip-roaring anti-slavery speech on the floor of the U.S. Senate, and then he was sitting at his desk, kind of sending copies of the speech home for free to prove to his constituents that he was doing a good job in the fight against slavery. And then a representative from the other side of Capitol Hill from the Congress, Preston Brooks, senator, a congressman from South Carolina, came over to the Senate side and burst into the Senate chamber and tried to kill Senator Sumner with a cane, and he nearly did it. But it wasn't, and he was proud to have nearly done it. And South Carolina still has the cane in a museum, and we'll just leave that where it is. The incident is not only an instance of brutality in Congress. I mean, there were many instances of incivility and brutality. A lot of people brought guns with them into the legislature. It was very common, and pointed them at each other. People did get into fistfights. Sometimes there were bench-clearing brawls of U.S. senators. But I like the lithograph that's on the cover of my book because it's an iconic moment in American history and really represented the depth of emotion about slavery and abolition. So and people say that things have gotten really uncivil in the American Congress. I always think back to that moment and think that it could be worse. It gives us a window into the range of acceptable behavior. Many people thought that the beating of Senator Sumner was fair and it was justified. I mean, a lot of the South thought it was a heroic moment, not just because of their political views, but also Senator Sumner did make some ad hominem attacks on the other guy's family. So it was about honor as well, which in the 19th century was worth having a duel over or even trying to murder somebody. In the 18th and the 19th century in the United States, people really did try hard to kill each other over honor, feuds, insults, and the like, and it makes us seem a lot more civilized, but not much comfort if you live in the 21st century and not the 19th. So I don't mean to make incivility sound ancient. It rolled along with us into the 20th century from the 19th century. Lynchings, for example, were justified as a form of social action in the American South up until the 1960s. There was incivility and often murder rooted in hate on the ground in the North and the South, but also in our political discourse. And then moving further into the 1930s and 1940s, FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, you may know he was a socialist, he was a fascist, all kinds of name callings about him. Ronald Reagan was a monster, George Bush, a village idiot, Barack Obama, an undercover Muslim anti-capitalist revolutionary, and so on. Incivility is worrisome in many ways, but it was made more so by the diffusion of broadcast media. For example, back in the mid-20th century, here's something you all know. Two great social scientists from Columbia, Lazarsfeld and Merton, I think everybody here should know about them, coined a phrase for the problematic effects of the media, the narcotizing dysfunction. Too much exposure to media, as they wrote in the 1940s about radio, could be debilitating. Listening to media, watching it, constant political talk, they argued leads to inaction, not action. You replace doing with knowing. And there are many instances of this, and I think it's a good theory. It's hard to demonstrate empirically, but very interesting. And I'd go one step further than that and argue that seeing incivility on television or on the internet may be debilitating as well and have that kind of narcotizing effect. It is true that some media figures in the United States, like Rush Limbaugh on the right, have been able to encourage political activity through media, so it's the opposite of a debilitating effect. And on the left, Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert. But on the whole, the political chatter around us in the United States today is not inspiring, far from it. Debilitating effect. It makes you want to avoid politics, very much like the students in my own survey. Okay, so that's a very brief run through some of American history. So the second thing I want to talk about is I wanted to defend incivility a little bit, or at least a balance of civility and incivility. So a few words on that. The fact that incivility has been present, although with differing intensity throughout American history, makes you wonder, do people like it? do people like incivility? They certainly find it useful. And I would argue, and that's one of the theoretical arguments in my book, is that civility is not a state of a nation, but it's a tool, a strategic asset that people use to get what they want, both civility and incivility. The reason you see so much negative advertising during campaigns, presidential campaigns in the United States, is because negativity does work. That's very well demonstrated. People remember negative advertising more than they remember positive advertising about a candidate. Negative advertising gets out the vote. It raises money. It mobilizes voters. But I've argued that if we think about incivility or civility as strategic weapons, it's less hurtful. It's less emotionally hurtful. If rudeness or trash talk is seen as just talk, is seen as one weapon in someone's rhetorical arsenal, isn't it less disturbing? So perhaps, again, we need a thicker skin in politics and not be so appalled and aghast at name-calling or insulting labels. If it's free speech, why do we find it so problematic when we can use our own free speech to defend ourselves, our position, our fellow believers? I don't know, when did we get so concerned with everybody's feelings and become so fragile with regard to free discourse? And this is something that you see nothing of, or at least I have not, in colonial American history or early American democratic history, is concern that all the mudslinging that went on in the 18th century would hurt anybody's feelings. So are we a culture of delicate flowers with so little self-esteem? Or are we the kind of free, rough and tumble democracy that I think our founding fathers probably were closer to in their envisioning of political discourse? But going a little further even, something I've thought about and some of my colleagues have thought about, maybe incivility is very attractive to us. Maybe we can't stay away from it because it is so engaging and intriguing to us. It's always been a part of American democracy. There must be something functional about it when something is around that long. Through different eras, even with different kinds of manifestations, there's something attractive. And Rod Hart at the University of Texas, he's a terrific colleague of mine. He's also working on incivility, and he gave a list the other last year when he came to our campus, which I thought was very compelling and sort of resonated with a lot of what I was trying to argue. And Hart asks, why would anyone love incivility? I mean, let's get to the bottom of that. And so here are a few of his answers. First, because it's dramatic. It handily concentrates attention on a given problem. So exciting. Second, because it's social. It's a way of making community with others. Incivility. It's a way of connecting with other people. Third, it's dialectical, and we love this. It's two-sided, and that's very attractive in a world with a lot of sides and a lot of gray. So it's efficient from a rhetorical standpoint and maybe a cognitive standpoint. It's easy to swallow because it's two sides. Fourth, incivility is attractive because it is personified. It concentrates firepower on a definable entity. I'm not sure about that one, but take that as you will. Fifth, this is very good. Incivility attractive to us always has been because it's gentrified. It is violence arrested. It's hate gone middle class. Six, I think this rings true as well. Incivility attractive to us throughout the ages because it's expulsive. It's primal. It lets us blow off steam. Very functional in that way. It's compensatory. It lets us do something when nothing can be done. And I think that of all the reasons why incivility is with us, at least today, in American politics, could not be more accurate. There is a kind of general feeling of helplessness, a disabled feeling about how to fix things in public policy, how to bridge a very wide partisan gap that gets wider every day. But civility, all the yelling and screaming and rudeness that you see on cable television or on the internet, is compensatory. At least we can do that, even if we can't fix what's more profoundly wrong with American politics. Third, as the weakest part, as I said, I have some ideas, some ways to reduce incivility or at least make it more tolerable in the sense of getting accustomed to it and even getting practice in dealing with it. So what can we do? There's a few things that I mentioned in my book, and the first is to teach argument. and that's something that we don't do in the United States. Many times in a college or university, there's a requirement to teach public speaking, to take public speaking, and that's not argument. So teaching of argument is rarely done outside of a communication department or outside of a debate club. It's something that certainly can be done in college, but it can be done in a middle school or high school with very young children. It's not hard to learn how to argue. Rules of argument, from the formal to the informal, all kinds of resources out there from great teachers on the internet, and maybe it's a matter of, again, integrating them into education at a very young age, so that people can learn how to make arguments, learn how to make them well, and most importantly, learn how not to get hurt by arguments, and kind of rise above, have passion, but kind of rise above the emotion that seems to have students, at least, and other people avoiding argument. Second, using technology to teach it, have online debates, video debates, critique them, fun stuff. Young people, you have no problem with self-revelation on the internet, for example. So a lot of argumentation can be done there. Maybe that's a less painful way to learn how to do it, and creating a kind of culture of debate, a culture of argument through social networks, through social media, again, as a starting place as you get ready to have an argument with somebody face to face, which is, I think, the hardest thing for people to do. So I talk in there about learning how to debate, learning how to argue, but also develop a culture of listening, which is one of the other sides of this. And there are some interesting projects in the United States. One of them is put on by National Public Radio, which it's called StoryCorps, and it's a national program where they tape people telling their life stories to each other, and it's supposed to model storytelling and listening for Americans. It started out well. It's kind of devolved into this kind of very emotional thing where people, when they're taped, and this is to be put in the Library of Congress into the archives. It used to be they talked about more macro historical things and where they were at this or that stage in their lives, but it's gotten very emotional, like "I love you," and it started out as a great experiment, again, in modeling how to talk and how to listen to the American public, but it had some good seeds in it, and there are some others sponsored by foundations like Kettering. In the area of fixes and how to diminish incivility, I'm often asked about and get into arguments about this, about journalists and about pundits. Is Fox News, to take one outlet in the United States, is that somehow responsible for the decline in public discourse and the kind of lack of evidence that people have when they're making arguments about politics? Are talk shows, especially cable news and newscasts themselves, to blame for a lot of the incivility that we see? And if we fix them somehow and fix our journalists, is that going to solve the incivility problem? And, I think that some media probably, the really excitable, flamboyant advocacy media, they play some part in furthering incivility, but to my mind, it's small and smaller than we'd like to admit. And again, back to Rod Hart's list and what I've been arguing before, the truth is that many, many viewers and listeners, and we're talking about tens of millions of people, really enjoy this, and they tune into it. So I think it all says something more about the citizenry, about Americans and what we like and what we're attracted to than about media or journalists. Partisanship in the extreme, even if it doesn't represent where most Americans are, and Americans are much more moderate than what you see represented on American television. Partisanship is, in the extreme, is very engaging also to people, and so is the incivility. And so those two things are working together right now in a very kind of complicated way in the United States. But I think that it's most important when trying to theorize about civility and incivility to hold a mirror up to ourselves as citizens, and again, figure out why we're attracted to these particular forms of political discourse. Likely because there isn't much else on that is as entertaining. But it could also be that we have become somewhat lazy and shallow, and like to have people yelling at us and demanding our attention, through this kind of circus, through a lot of antics. A lot depends on the journalist, on an editor, on a network. Some are clearly not enabling civility. Others are, and you have some some attempts out there on the part of American journalists to change the nature of discussion, to demand more evidence from politicians, from each other. But we have really very few models of excellence. And again, as the partisan divide gets wider and wider, civility becomes, more and more elusive. Some of the Sunday talk shows in the United States, we have these traditional talk shows on Sunday morning. They have very low viewership. They're very civil. Therefore, they have low viewership. We have a news hour on public television also, barely stays alive, tries to bring in experts, press them for evidence in ways that might influence issue debates. But the problem is that a lot of these kind of talk shows are very dull to a lot of people. They're not as interesting, they're not as exciting, and they don't fulfill all the functions I talked about earlier. If we can integrate passionate debate into our media, television news, mainstream internet sites, even radio, an old-fashioned medium that a lot of people in the United States still listen to very, very closely, we'll be a much better nation. There's no question about that, I think. I think there's nothing wrong with some incivility and maybe a pretty big dose of it. It does seem like an inevitable part of heated debate, but can we learn to recognize it better, to critique it, to deal with it? And again, it's a structural matter in part about how we educate our young people. But it's a cultural matter most of all, a sociocultural matter. Do we want to become a nation based on both civility and substantive argument? And if we do, we have to force a higher level of sophistication and also learn to toughen up. So I'm not sure what the 2014 elections are going to bring in the United States. Or elections after that. The various House and Senate races that we have coming up soon determine the makeup of our Congress, and that's going to be vitally important then in the presidential election. I think the 2012 presidential election that some of you might have followed between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama was the candidates were fundamentally civil, they're intelligent, they're rational people, but I also don't know how much that matters, what the character of these people are, because the context in which they debate, in which they speak, invariably pushes them to talk in uncivil ways that are pretty much likely out of character. In any case, they want to win, and that can justify anything at times. So it's fashionable to say in the United States with authority that what the founding fathers would have wanted in political discourse. I think it's very clear they would have wanted passionate, sometimes uncivil, but substantive debate. They wouldn't be worried about hurting anybody's feelings. These are people that looked forward to having duels, remember. So that sort of public debate, public discourse would be worthy of democracy, the greatest of all democracies. The founding fathers thought we were capable of it. Democratic theorists think we're capable of it. Are we capable of it? It's hard to tell. We've got the incivility down pretty well, but somehow lost the substance. And the passion has a lot of play acting, more than real earnest feeling, especially in our Congress. So that's my general topic. Again, happy to get more into theoretical matters. How this relates to public opinion, for example, or also talk about American politics and where we're at right now, which is a kind of a painful place. And absolutely would love to hear more about Israeli political discourse. It looks civil from where I am, but maybe not. Anyway, thanks so much for listening.
I would like to hand over the place to Dr. Karen Tannenbaum, who would lead a Q&A or comments to this very interesting and in a way very disturbing talk when we think about our place, our own mired balagan, which made a mess.
Thank you again.
Sure.
Fascinating talk, and we'll now take some.
Comments and questions?
Thank you so much. It was really wonderful. Because you invited us to give you examples from the Israeli context, so I was reminded, I'm myself not Israeli, so the real Israelis are going to help me. I was reminded of an episode where a group of Jews from Middle Eastern origins protested very vehemently because of poverty. Golda Meir was in power at the time, and their protest was very vocal. It was not a very big group, but a very vocal group. And Golda Meir famously said about them, "Em lo bachurim נחמדים," right? She said they're not nice people. In other words, she did not say the word incivil, but I'm sure that this is what she meant. She meant these people are not civil. And this is the part of my question. So if I take that episode, obviously these young people, I don't know if they were young, by the way, maybe they were not that young, but these people were not, did not receive mainstream Ashkenazi education, were living in really dire conditions, and used whatever means they had at their disposal to make a point, and they made it. And the reaction was they're not fully abiding by the rules of the rational political game. They are not nice people. And we mock today. We mock, and I think rightly so, Golda Meir's view of their protest as simply being uncivil. So my question is, what would you make out of the possible claim, which I'm raising as a possibility, that civility is in fact a norm? I mean, it's a norm that's historically located. It arises, I think, in Europe, in courts, in cities with both aristocrats and bourgeois public. And it is a norm of speech. You signal your demeanor in deportment and manners of speech by being civil. It's the same word then also that I think gets translated. I mean, civil, it's a very interesting, I would imagine it's an interesting word because it's both who you express as your social being and also civil liberties. It gets translated into that realm. But how about the possibility that it's a way of regulating and controlling and signaling a speech that is inadmissible? Which brings me to my question, if that is the case, then did you ask yourself how we could, or do we want to distinguish between speech that must be and must remain uncivil and the one that is really uncivil? I don't know if I formulated this well.
No, I struggle with this too. So I struggle with it, then I dismissed it, trying to define civility. Without question, as you said, civility is historically located. So what was uncivil what was civil in the 18th century, I mean, spitting and, their social manners would just, appall you, things that people did at dinner parties and in social company. And then in the 19th century, we don't do those things anymore. So I think in any era you can find boundaries to what is civil and what is uncivil, and a lot of people can recognize those very clearly. But from a theoretical standpoint, I don't think that goes anywhere. I mean, yes, there are norms, and but to just kind of redefine or put civility just right into that category and says that it's a kind of a norm, and we recognize it, and we don't cross that line like the protesters do, and if we do, we are subject to being dismissed. Or to socialize. I just didn't feel like it was developing anymore as compared to what I settled on, which is civility and incivility as strategic weapons and assets, which then have more of a kind of open up a lot of these historical periods, I think, in a more textured way as compared to the norms, which are norms. So I take what you're saying absolutely, and that was, one of the great distractions of writing this book was there are some wonderful historians of civility and social norms, and you read about each period and you can't stop because they're so interesting. But I guess I was looking for, as you taught me, trans-historical grand theory that might be able to take me different places. But absolutely, I stumbled around with that for a while.
I'm not sure about the that I fully understand or feel confident regarding your main term, civility and incivility. So I would, it would be good if you can a little bit elaborate on that. What I hear is, what I see is a kind of discussion of how newsworthiness has been changed. I mean, it's the thing that you are discussing about negativity, personalization, all these ingredients of incivility that you just were talking about are the basic of newsworthiness around the years, and newsworthiness has been changed according to or due to changes in the media, in the medium. And if we look at that, you know, if, for instance, if we study the attacks in Israel, in Israeli media, we see that, for instance, in the 50s, in the beginning of the state, the attacks were ideological, but they were attacks, and then they moved to more personal attacks, less ideological. But these are things that are being driven by changes in probably in the media environment and political environment and the interaction between them. So, how and in what way your main term of civility or incivility add to that, or does something different?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I spent a lot of time on too. A more, if I may, kind of a technological determinist argument that as media broadcast range gets wider, it's possible to reach more people, to reach them quickly. That there's this that steps up incivility somehow. And I guess I just feel like there's too much evidence, you know, from before the broadcast media of very, you know, kind of personalized attacks of a lot of the same of which we see today, and are a constant, those kind of deeply personal attacks that I don't think any kind of technological determinist argument works very well. Now, again, not that social media and the internet and the ability to be anonymous on the internet hasn't, you know, helped us, you know, be uncivil in more instances. It is easier to do as compared to when you're in a face-to-face setting. But I don't know how much it has to do with that. Again, except as a matter of scale or intensity. But I did, yeah, certainly rolled it around because I was, you know, was trained in media studies. Oh, he's making a 2x2 table, which is there's something going to come with that. Yeah.
Hello, and thank you for such an interesting talk. My question relates to how civility and incivility are related to public opinion dynamics, and I'm particularly interested in how it either aids or perpetuates preference falsification, to use Coran's one. Preference falsification, so opinion dynamics such as false consensus or pluralistic ignorance. How, whether, if you could just draw broadly, in what way are we better off or worse off as a result of an uncivil or civil discourse? I mean, I am being agnostic about it. And in what ways these points where we are hesitant in conversation to truly express our preferences does not help us realize what it is that we share and strive to common good, so forth. So
yeah, I'm not. You know, I'm not there yet. Taking the field, I really do know public opinion and matching it up with some of the work on this book on incivility. But I guess that you know, seeing incivility as a strategic asset. Seeing it as something that's attractive, that's not going to go away because it has all these functions. I think, you know, maybe it gives some hope that maybe there could be a public opinion. Most of my work is that public opinion doesn't exist, and there's no such thing because it depends on context. It depends how you measure it. It is a phantom. It's a rhetorical construction that gets used, by politicians to get what they want. But maybe if we could learn, if incivility and putting up with that, and kind of passionate argumentation that has substance, if that is a integrating force, if that does bring people together as Rod Hart wants to argue, then maybe there is hope that there is, in some instances, in some communities, a kind of public opinion that, incivility maybe is this coming together, this community forming force, if done properly. Kind of empty name calling is not the kind of incivility that's going to get us anywhere. It was a little name calling, a little rudeness because it's hard for people to, kind of stay in boundaries really well when they're being passionate. But I'm taken with this notion of incivility being something that attracts us to each other, and that's something profoundly social.
Fight to keep warm.
That's right. That's right.
Let's remember our days. Right?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I'll keep thinking about it.
Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. And I have so many comments to say.
Uh-oh, I got my blank sheet of
Yeah,
paper.
but, I think I'll restrict myself only to the most important matters. First of all, for your comment, I think in Hebrew we have the differentiation between Dugri and Kasach. Dugri is assertive, straight talk, which is based on solidarity and on social bonds, while Kasach, reflecting the losing of collective values in Israeli society, is defined as personally directed as a put-down at someone's face. This definition is by Tamar Katriel, is a linguistic anthropologist. Oh, okay. Thank you. And so this is a specific comment, and generally speaking, incivility is a big issue today, not only in the US, but also in the UK and Australia, and even in Israel, which is defined as a society without scripts of politeness. And in the UK, for example, Tony Blair initiated 10 years ago the respect agenda. Mm-hmm. It was a campaign to root antisocial behavior. In Australia, they did the same and was blamed for plagiarism. And interestingly, it's a big issue. It's a big issue in the States with Deborah Tannen argument culture, and Robin Lake of language war and claim on her heritage. But I think it is theoretically sound, mostly in Europe, with a group called Polite and Impoliteness Research Group, tens of articles and books about issues of incivility, rudeness, and politeness. The most important scholar there is Jonathan Culpeper, with his recent book about impoliteness. He has two interesting theoretical issues, which of course relates to your talk. First, well, his claim is that democracies have not become more uncivilized. He compares, for example, requests from the 16th century in England to requests made today, written requests, and found that today we are more polite than in the past, for example. He says that civility or incivility is about perceptions, so the eyes of the beholder, and today we are experiencing a loss of the social bonds, which cause more sensitivity. So when we are more sensitive, we feel like that other people are more rude to us or to our agendas. And second is about the media. There are more spectacle of rudeness in the media, which gives us the sense that life became more incivil. This is his explanation. I have plenty of things to say, but I'm feeling that I'm turning into a lecture, so I'll stop here.
No, I do think the anxiety about disintegrating social bonds, it makes the incivility bother us more. So the incivility has always been there, but when you feel loss of community, that's when it really starts to hurt and becomes not so much a, a rhetorical opportunity and talk, but it becomes something more serious. And I think that's going on in the United States. I mean, with this kind of partisan divide that we're seeing. And, I sit there sometimes and watch, and I think in my lifetime, it's not going to get bridged. I mean, there's the hope of a great leader going to bring it all together, Barack Obama, it's not working. But it's that makes the rude talk then very scary. It's like we're losing, America. And it's not one nation.
Thank you again for your fascinating talk. I'm not going to hold back. I've got three points. I'll try and present them briefly. The first one is a question, which was that there are genres and practices of incivility which we cherish in democratic life, in particular satire. So how does satire become integrated into a program to increase civility, in particular based around rational, substantive debate? Because it would seem to be the ultimate kind of safety valve that you're talking about, but involve a particular kind of sensibility and training that is antithetical to that kind of substantive rational debate that we would want to encourage in other forums. So that's the first thing. How do you maintain that kind of incivility? And is it a kind of civil incivility, a gentrified one that you would talk about? On the second question the more historical question is how do you create how do you account for a kind of, well, I'm not an Americanist, so I don't know how important this is in American history, but certainly in European history, the rise of notions of sentiment and sensibility from the 18th and through the 19th century become very important as ways of accounting for increased sensitivity to others and others' emotions and others' needs and demands and requirements, almost to the extent of incapacitation and the vulnerability of the self. That strikes me as something that can be fruitfully thought of historically anyway, as a way of the thinning of skins to a certain extent. So that could be very interesting. Where I don't know how far that works within the American context, though. And the last thing is about broadcasting. I think one of the things that broadcasting does, radio and TV, is it puts the body back into expressive interactions in a way that writing doesn't. And it makes the body very, very visible as a site of management. This ties into what I think Eva was thinking about. So it puts a premium on control and management of the body, makes moments of incivility, in a sense, more public and more shocking. I mean, had people been able to see the actual fight on the Senate floor, again, it's to do with the overall context, so I don't know what would happen. But one of the interesting things about broadcasting is, I think, it brings the body back into view or into hearing. With radio in ways that were absent before to a mass audience, makes them part of the public itself and the public realm. And then I suppose the question is when we shift to an area where broadcasting and the body are part of a renewed textual ferment, which is partly what the internet does, what happens then? Perhaps part of the incivility, part of that expressive management, again shifts to a different medium or a different format, with repercussions for the kind of management that is used. Those are just three thoughts.
All right, it's like three very hard questions. So I'm trying to think of. So the first one is satire a form of civil, incivil, and acceptable, sophisticated incivility? Yes, I think so. But we have hardly any left in the United States. I mean, it was Jon Stewart for a while, but he really slipped. Again, very silly bathroom humor. I mean, it's not really the kind of satire of, let's say, the English 18th century that you'd hope for. So I see almost no political satire in the United States. Little doses of it here and there. Who do you like? Bill Maher. Yeah, that's close, but that's not a lot considering how. Large, diverse, interesting in the United States is worrisome. Saturday Night Live used to do political satire. They can't pull it off anymore. I think so. There's some loss of capacity or competence in actually pulling off political satire. It's worrisome. Because that is one of the nice gentrified ways that you could have incivility that's productive. So that's the first thing. Second, the thinning of manners and the kind of sensitive, especially in the 19th century. I think that's about, and something that I didn't study, very well or for very long, the relationship between the social manners and the political manners. And I think that's very understudied. The historians seem to me divided into two parts: the people who study social manners and cultural history, and the people who study politics and political discourse and political manners. So I think there's some big possibilities for dissertation. If anyone's looking for a topic, trying to bring those two things together in a way that even some excellent historians, I don't think, have done very well, because it's hard and you have to know about both. Last, the visible body. That's really interesting. I haven't thought much about that. Although, the lithograph that's on the cover of my book from the 19th century is, those are two bodies, one on top of the other, trying to murder Senator Sumner. So there were images of bodies in the midst of incivility. I guess their distribution not as wide or as easy to tune into as you have today, but I think the body in motion in incivility maybe has a kind of longer history. So I don't know, again, whether you can make the technological argument about that. But it's, again, very interesting. I haven't thought much about it. Well, thank you.
Ibrahim, I'm sorry that the microphone
That's
doesn't
fine,
reach.
that's fine. Actually, I have a question about the media. You mentioned that the media networks and journalists are personally responsible for the situation. And you mentioned even networks and shows by their name about the rudeness. But you know that these networks, especially in the US, are commercial ones, so they want to buy. Do you think that these networks reflect the society needs? And how do you explain that, especially on political issues regarding anything going in the US right now?
I think I actually put a little more blame on the public than on the media. I think some of the more the advocacy cable news, like Fox News, I saw over the years, since they started, they're poking, see how far they can go. In terms of garnering ratings, how much incivility, how much rudeness, and they keep pushing, and people like it, and so and back to Rod's list. So I think that they are somewhat responsible for giving it a try, for experimenting with it, but then people took them up on it, and that's probably the more interesting phenomenon. Than journalistic ways, and those are always kind of changing to maximize audience. But what was the end of your question?
Yeah, the idea that reflects the society. That's what they want.
Yes.
The rating, they are doing the rating very good, and it's like for 10 years. For example, Fox News, they are for 10 years on the top of the ratings. And you mentioned that, for example, even their own Sunday show, that is more respectable, is not doing good at all. And also, you mentioned that meeting the press for other networks, for example, are not doing for. So it's a problem in the society. The society is not changing. Let's take an example, the weapons or the guns issue, that they always talk about it. So the public would like to hear, the extreme point of view, and that's why they watch it. So and let's go to politics. Let's go to President Obama. And for example, the war that was supposed to be launched in Syria right now. The treatment that he got for that, or the shutdown of that happened like a few weeks ago, and the Congress debated how these media in rudeness took that personally against the president. So probably people like that, and that's part of the culture that exists right now within the U.S. How do you make up all these things and going towards civilization or incivilization? Sense.
Yeah, again, I've tried to avoid in the book, I don't want to make any trend, like we've gotten more civil or less civil. Just trying to take it out of any kind of trend analysis or historical analysis, and treat it more as a communication concept, as a rhetorical asset, as a strategic. I think that it just it seems to me it's probably going to get us further than the trend analysis, which that wasn't working for me. Because just when I think I'd find some real incivility that we have now, that there's never seen anything like it, I would find some example in either American history or European history that was much more uncivil, and where it had appeared before.
All right, thank you.
No.
Okay, so maybe a thought about the third part of what can we do or what should be done. Connecting Paul and Ibrahim, in fact, internet users are creating internet memes. And internet memes are often used as ways of negotiating political opinions in a way that is civil, I think, but also entertaining. So this is an entertaining debate of, for instance, there was the 99% meme, so people were standing with signs. Have you seen them kind of saying, we're the 99% because of this and this? And then other people kind of came up with signs saying, we are the 53%, saying this and this and this. And it became very interesting because it was a sphere of debate. It was a very entertaining sphere of debate because it was full of humor. You know, Star Wars, Luke Skywalker was in. And in a way, I think it might be a way of, at least for young people, kind of being engaged in politics, but making it entertaining and enjoying in a way that can actually help to advance.
Yeah, no, I think that's really it's playful, it's safe somehow because it's not dialectical like Rod Hart wants to say. It's a third rail, it's a third place rhetorically to go to have argument that has some boundaries to it. That's very interesting.
So I'm sorry to think in terms of fourfold tables, but I hear you talking about two variables, civility and substance. So you say, on the one hand, that civility drives substance away. Civility tends to avoid substance.
Yeah.
But then you say that incivility tends to be not about substance. So we have a problem.
As
that
practice.
Civility is not the variable that will produce substance.
I think that's more about as practiced, and so I'm trying to imagine a kind of a civility that has passion, has substance, where some rudeness interjected in there does not upset the whole apple cart.
No, I hear that,
So,
but you're saying that your impression is that empirically incivility drives substance out, which is what you're also saying in a different way than civility does. But now you're saying there must be a certain kind of incivility that will work.
Yeah, except the latter. Yeah. You notice how I slimed my way out of his 2x2 table. No, it's well taken about these two axes, but I guess the founding fathers reading more about the political discourse with each other. That's a way you don't expect the founding fathers of the United States to be inspirational, that they could be incredibly rude and incredibly substantive at the same time. So weirdly, that was the lesson they had to teach us, not the kind of lessons that people tend to draw from them as distinguished gentlemen, which they were not. And so they didn't articulate this all in a way that would be helpful to us in the 21st century, and we'll have to dig it out like archaeologists. But I think that's what the aim is.
Michael Schudson's point is that true political talk needs a referee. That it's not civil.
Any more questions from the back, from political science?
Is that what you do here? You put political science in the back? That's where the back of the bus? Yeah.
For a change.
Yeah.
No more questions.
Thank you so much. Very helpful. Thank you.